talons and tea leaves. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione entered the great hall for the breakfast the next day, the first thing they saw was Draco Malfoy, who seemed to be entertaining a large group of Slytherins with a very funny story. As they passed, Malfoy did a ridiculous impersonation of swooning fit, and there was a roar of laughter. "Ignore him," said Hermione, who was right behind Harry. "Just ignore him. It's not worth it." "Hey, Potter!" shrieked Pansky Parkinson, a Slytherin girl with a face like a pug. "Potter! The Dementors are coming! Potter! Woo!" Harry dropped into a seat at the Gryffindors table next to George Weasley. "New third-year course schedule," said George, passing over. "What's up with you, Harry?" "Malfoy," said Ron, sitting down on George's other side and glaring over at the Slytherin table. George looked up in time to see Malfoy pretending to faint with terror again. "That little git," he said calmly. "He wasn't so cocky last night when the Dementors were down at our end, at the end of the train. He came running into our compartment, didn't he, Fred?" "Ha! Nearly wet himself," said Fred, with a contemptuous glance at Malfoy. "I wasn't too happy myself," said George. "They're horrible things, those Dementors." "Sort of freeze your insides, don't they?" said Fred. "You didn't pass out, though, did you?" said Harry in a low voice. "Forget it, Harry," said George bracingly. "Dad had to go put out Azkaban one time. Remember, Fred? And he said it was the worst place he'd ever been. He'd come back all weak and shaking. They suck the happiness out of a place. Dementors, most of the prisoners, go mad in there. Anyways, we'll all see how happy Malfoy looks after our first Quidditch match," said Fred. "Gryffindor versus Slytherin, first game of the season, remember?" The only time Harry and Malfoy had faced each other in a Quidditch match, Malfoy had definitely come off worse. Feeling slightly more cheerful, Harry helped himself to sausages and fried tomatoes. Hermione was examining the new schedule. "Ooh, good. We're starting some new subjects today," she said happily. "Hermione," said Ron, frowning as he looked over her shoulder, "they've messed up your schedule. Look, they've got you down for about 10 subjects a day. There isn't enough time." "Oh, I'll manage. I fixed it all with Professor McGonagall. But look," said Ron, laughing. "See this morning? 9 o'clock divination, and underneath 9 o'clock Muggle studies. And," Ron leaned closer to the schedule, disbelieving, "look! Underneath that it's arithmetic at 9 o'clock. I mean, I know you're good, Hermione, but no one's that good. How are you supposed to be in all those places at once?" "Don't be silly," said Hermione shortly. "Of course I won't be in 3 classes at once." "Well, then, pass the marmalade," said Hermione. "But—" "Oh, Ron, what's it to you if my schedule's a bit all full?" Hermione snapped. "I told you, I've fixed it all with Professor McGonagall." Just then Hagrid entered the great hall. He was wearing his long moleskin overcoat and was absent-mindedly swinging a dead polecat from an enormous hand. "All right," he said eagerly, pausing on the way to the staff table. "You're in my first ever lesson, right after lunch. Been up since 5 getting everything ready. Hope it's okay. Me, a teacher, honestly." He grinned broadly at them, headed for off to the table, still swinging the polecat. Wonder what he's been getting ready," Ron said with a note of anxiety in his voice. The hall starting to empty and people headed off towards their first lesson. Ron checked his course schedule. "We better go. Look, divination's at the top of the North Tower. It'll take 10 minutes to get there." They finished their breakfast hastily and said goodbye to Fred and George and walked through the hall. As they passed the Slytherin table, Malfoy yet did another impression of fainting a fit. The shouts of laughter followed Harry into the entrance hall. The journey through the castle to the North Tower was a long one. 2 years at Hogwarts hadn't taught them everything about the castle, and they had never been inside the North Tower before. "There's got to be a shortcut," Ron panted, as they climbed the 7th long staircase, emerged unfamiliar landing where there was nothing but a large painting of a bar stretch of glass hanging from a bare stretch of glass hanging from the stone. I think it's this way, said Hermione, peering down at the empty passage to the right. Can't be, said Ron. That's south. Look, you see? A bit of lake out the window. Harry was watching the painting. A fat, dapple gray pony had just ambled onto the grass and was grazing nonchalantly. Harry was used to the subjects of Hogwarts paintings moving around and leaving their frames to visit one another, but he always enjoyed watching. A moment later, a short, squat knight in a suit of armor clanked into the picture of his pony. By the look of the grass stains on his metal knees, he had just fallen off. Ah! He yelled, seeing Harry, Ron, and Hermione. What villains are these that trespass upon the private lands? Come to scorn at my fall, perchance? Draw your knaves, you dogs. They watched in astonishment as the little knight tugged at his sword out of his scabbard and began bandishing it violently, hopping up and down in rage. But the sword was too long for him, and particularly wild swing made him overbalance, and he landed face down in the grass. Are you all right? Said Harry, moving closer to the picture. Get back, you scurvy braggart! Back, you rogue! The knight seized the sword again and used it to push himself back up. But the blade sank deeply into the grass, and though he pulled with all his might, he couldn't get it out again. Finally, he had to flop back down on the grass and push up his visor to mop his face with sweat. Listen, said Harry, taking advantage of the knife's exhaustion. We're looking for the North Tower. You don't know the way, do you? A quest! The knight raged, seemed to be vanished instantly. He clanked to his feet and shouted, Come follow me, dear friends, and we shall find our goal. We else shall perish bravely in the charge. He gave his sword another fruitless tug, tried and failed to mount the fat pony and gave up and cried, Oh, foot then, good sirs! Oh, gentle lady, on and on! And he ran clankingly loud into the left side of the frame, out of sight. They hurried after him along the corridor, following the sound of his armor. Every now and then they spotted him running through a picture ahead. Be stout of heart, the worst is yet to come, yelled the knight, but they saw him reappear, a alarmed group of women in crinolines, whose picture hung on the wall of the narrow spiral staircase. Puffing loudly, Harry, Ron, and Hermione climbed tightly spiraling steps, getting dizzier and dizzier until they had heard the murmur of voices that knew they had reached the classroom. Farewell! Cried the knight, popping his head into the painting of some sinister-looking monks. Farewell, my comrades in arms! If you ever shall need a noble heart or a steely sinew, call upon Sir Cardigan. Yes, we will call you, muttered Ron, as the knight disappeared, if we ever need someone mental. They climbed the last few steps and emerged into the landing where most of the class had already assembled. There was no doors off the landing, but Ron nudged Harry and pointed at the ceiling, where there was a circular trap door with a brass plague on it. Sybil Trelawney, divination teacher, Harry read. How are we supposed to get up there? As though in answer to his question, the trapdoor suddenly opened and a silvery ladder descended right at Harry's feet. Everyone got quiet. After you, said Ron, grinning, and Harry climbed the ladder first. He emerged into the strangest looking classroom he had ever seen. In fact, it didn't look like a classroom at all. More like a cross between someone's attic and an old-fashioned tea shop. At least 20 small circular tables were crammed inside it, all around by chintz armchairs, fat little proofs, and everything was lit with a dim crimson light. The curtains at the windows were all closed, and many lamps were draped with dark red scarves. It was stifling warm, and the fire that was burning under the crowded mantelpiece was giving off a heavy, sickly sort of perfume as it heated a large copper kettle. Shelves were running around The circular walls were crammed with dusty-looking feather scrubs, candles, and many packs of tattered playing cards, countless silver and crystal bowls, and a huge array of teacups. Ron appeared at Harry's shoulder, and the class assembled around them, all talking in whispers. "Where is she?" Ron said. A voice came suddenly out of the shadows, a soft, misty sort of voice. "Welcome!" it said. "How nice to see you in the physical world at last." Harry's immediate impression was of a large, glittering insect. Professor Trelawney moved into the firelight, and they saw that she was very thin. Very large glasses magnified her eyes to several times their natural size, and she was draped with gauzy spindle shawl. Innumerable chains and beads hung around her spindly little neck. Arms and her hands were encrusted with bangles and rings. "Sit, my children, sit," she said, as they climbed awkwardly into the armchairs and sank into the poufs. Harry, Ron, and Hermione themselves around the same table. "Welcome to divination," said Professor Trelawney, who had seated herself in a winged armchair in front of the fire. "My name is Professor Trelawney. You might not have seen me before. I find that descending too often into the hustle and bustle of the main school clouds my inner eye." Nobody said anything to this extraordinary pronouncement. Professor Trelawney delicately rearranged her shawl and continued, "So, you have chosen to study divination, the most difficult of all magical arts. I must warn you at the outset that if you do not have a sight, there will be very little I will be able to teach you. Books can only take you so far in this field." At those words, both Harry and Ron glanced, grinning at Hermione, who looked startled at the news that books wouldn't be much help on this subject. "Many witches and wizards, talented though they are, in the area of loud bangs and smells and sudden disappearings, are yet unable to penetrate the veiled mysteries of future," Professor Trelawney went on, her enormous gleaming eyes moving from the nervous face. "It's a gift granted to you very few. You, boy," she said suddenly to Neville, who almost toppled out of his poof. "Is your grandmother well?" "I think so," said Neville tremulously. "I wouldn't be so sure if I were you, dear," said Professor Trelawney, in the firelight glinting in her emerald earrings. Neville gulped. Professor Trelawney continued placidly. "We will be covering the basic methods of divination this year. First term, you will be devoted to reading the tea leaves. Next term, we shall progress to palmistry. By the way, my dear," and she looked suddenly at Parvati Patil, "beware of red-haired man." Parvati gave a look to Ron, who sat right behind her, the edge of the chair from him. "In the second term," Professor Trelawney went on, "we shall progress to the crystal ball. And if we finish with the 5 omens, that is, unfortunately, classes will be disrupted in February by a nasty bout of the flu. I find myself will lose my voice, and around Easter one of our members will leave us forever." A very tense silence followed the pronouncement, but Professor Trelawney seemed unaware of it. "I wonder, dear," she said, at Lavender Brown, who was nearest to the shrank back into her chair, "if you could pass me the large silver teapot." Lavender, looking relieved, stood up, took the enormous teapot from the shelf, and put it down on the table in front of Professor Trelawney. "Thank you, my dear. Incidentally, that thing you are dreading, it will happen on Friday, the 16th of October. Now," Lavender trembled. "Now, I want you all to divide into pairs. Collect teacups from the shelves. Come to me, and I will fill it. Then sit down and drink the tea until only 1 dregs remain. Swill around the tea tub 3 times with the left hand, and then turn your cup upside down on its saucer and wait for the last of the tea to drain away, and then give your cup to your partner to read until you interpret the patterns of using pages 5, 6 of Unfogging the Future. I shall move among you, helping you with your instruction. Oh dear. She caught Neville by the arm to make his arm as he made to stand up. After you've broken your first cup, would you be so kind to select one of the blue pattern ones? I'm rather attached to the pink.